So, once again, hello everybody. So my name is Elliot Jalley. I'm a product manager at Broadcom. I work out of the R&D Centre in Prague in the Czech Republic. And today I'm going to talk to you about all things mainframe API. So just to give you a flavor of what's coming, again, just got half an hour, so it's going to be sort of quite high level and sort of in broad terms. But we're going to talk about API categories. So two broad categories of APIs that we've identified. API stakeholders. So who are the folks involved in actually creating mainframe APIs and consuming those APIs? And then going to spend some time on looking at the role of Zowe. And how APIs are, a foundational element of Zowe. And then I'm going to finish with one concrete example of, how APIs are used in production environments today. So just to, just to level set, I mean, I guess, all of you, certainly the majority of you are aware of what an API is, what it does, and I'm going to be talking about mainframe APIs specifically today. It's not a new phenomenon. They've been around for years, as I'm sure many of you are aware. But we're starting to see with the advent of Zowe, we're starting to see some a framework and some standardization around these APIs. So, why are APIs important? Well, generally, they're a universal way of tying things together. So there's been obviously over the years, there's been a ton of investment into the mainframe, in terms of development time, processes, security, workload, sort of fine-tuning. And, along the way, what we've seen is sort of, there's been new technology coming along, new development methodologies. So whether that's, CI/CD, new tooling, monitoring systems, ticketing systems, software vulnerability, all that kind of thing. And so, what APIs enable is a way to kind of tie some of these new methodologies and systems to, the historic legacy, all that investment that's gone into the mainframe. So I'm going to move on to API categories. So again, two sort of very broad definitions. So, on the one hand, we see business APIs, and I've got a little quote here which aims to kind of define what I mean by business APIs. So think of business APIs as these are used to provide business data to an organization's end users. So whether that's a mobile application, web page, etc. So these are really aimed and targeted at your organization's end users. So that's one, business. And then the second category of two, again, broadly defined as infrastructure APIs. So what do we mean when we say infrastructure? So these are internal versus external. So these are internal APIs, and these are often used by dev or ops teams within organizations to optimize, improve, automate internal processes. So, the difference between this and business, these are not intended for an organization's business customers, but rather as a way to, optimize internal processes within the organization. So I just want to sort of expand a little bit on those two definitions and sort of go into a couple of examples. So at the top there, you see infrastructure APIs. You see some of the categories that we're talking about, database management, job scheduling, etc. And then I wanted to give you just a very quick real-world example of what we mean when we talk about infrastructure APIs. So, and does this work? Yeah, that's up here. So, if you imagine, and this is a use case that that has the Broadcom CA7 workload automation REST API as its sort of primary actor. So imagine that you are in an organization, you're the owner of a batch job, and something goes wrong with that batch job in some way. It needs to be restarted, or maybe you need to reconfigure something. So typically, what you see in organizations is that batch owner then needs to go via an operator and a ticketing system and put that request in, and then it gets to the operator. They make whatever usually fairly trivial change that needs to be done, and then the batch job is once again running, or it has a slightly different configuration. That's a manual process that can take several days, even weeks. It's not unheard of. Now, with the REST API in place, what we're seeing is that that the batch owner no longer has to go via the ticketing system to an operator, but instead, they can actually make that configuration change directly, or restart the batch job, whatever it is, via the REST API. So that is, that's an example of using an infrastructure API to kind of optimize and automate an internal process. So with that REST API in place, the change literally takes minutes rather than days, weeks through a ticketing system. And then if we go down, again, fairly simple example in terms of a business API. So the example I got here, a large bank that would allow their debit or credit card customers to make payments in an Apple Pay app, or Google Wallet if that's your choice. So again, powered by this is all powered by APIs, and is an example of the API being used to service real end users. And then finally, over on the right-hand side, you can see a couple of examples of, or right-hand side, yeah, as you're looking at, you can see a couple of examples of sort of management solutions that can be used, by organizations to manage either business or infrastructure APIs. So, if I start on the business side, you can see there Layer 7 and Apogee. Just two examples. There are other solutions out there. And depending on the maturity of the organization in terms of how many APIs they have, if they're continuing to create APIs, then they might choose to use one of those management solutions. And then on the top above those, you can see the Zowe logo up there, and that refers to the API mediation layer, and which is primarily intended to be used to manage infrastructure APIs. And I will talk about that a little bit later. So API stakeholders. So again, quite a sort of fairly simplistic view, but just very high level to give you a feeling. So on the one hand, API producers, or you can think of them as creators. So these are folks who build and expose and operate APIs. And within a Zowe context, we like to call them Zowe conformant APIs, right? And then API consumers. So these are the folks that are in an organization, and they're going out and looking for APIs that they can use, for their application. So they're, they don't create the APIs, but they're looking to use the APIs. So Here I just want to touch a little bit on the conformance program. Joe had a slide on this just earlier in the presentation before, and I'll touch on this again a little bit later. But as a API producer looking to create something, an API that can be used within a Zowe context, you have the ability to follow a conformance program, and what that means is it's going to give you a kind of a framework for building the API that's going to make it standardized and optimized to run in a Zowe environment or a Zowe context. So it gives you the confidence as a producer of the API that you're going to produce something which is going to be useful and secured and matches a certain criteria and standards. And then, obviously on the consumer side, it gives that person, those people, the confidence to actually use that API because they can see there's a badge there, Zowe conformant, which means, okay, great. If they follow the criteria around security, it's an API which is going to work in my Zowe environment because, it's followed a framework. And then, so as I said earlier on, API consumers, on the other hand, they're looking to consume the APIs to build or optimize their internal applications within their organization. So obviously, vendors like Broadcom, IBM, Rocket, building out a catalog of conformant APIs for their solutions, and they continue to do that. And what that means is that customers can actually that have entitlement to some of these vendor solutions can actually go out and leverage these APIs to access mainframe resources on their side. One thing I just wanted to point out here is, so not only do you have catalog of sort of vendor produced APIs, but actually us as software vendors are actually using these APIs ourselves sometimes for our own solutions. Not only are they available as kind of standalone APIs for our customers, but we're actually integrating them into our solutions as well. So where can you actually find these APIs? So this is actually something which is not. It should be much simpler than it is at the moment. It's not that easy. When you speak to customers, folks that are looking for APIs, they're not always sure where to go. So there's always Google, obviously. So we know that developers like to just go and Google, whatever solution they're looking for, an API, and that's one way to find it. At the top left there, Open Mainframe Project Interactive Landscape. So that's what Joe brought up earlier on. So you go to the OMP pages, and you can bring up, the list of all the Zowe integrations that are available. Vendor documentation as well, bottom right. So at Broadcom, you go to a particular solution, and you'll be able to locate whether that solution has a REST API, and there'll be some documentation around that. And then finally, the Zowe API catalog. So that is the sort of front end component to the mediation layer. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. But that also is a kind of inventory of all the APIs that are available in your environment, right? So they're the ones that you have entitlement to that you've onboarded in your environment. Yeah, so this is a slide that, again, that Joe showed earlier on. So this really gives you a good sort of flavor of, all the APIs that are available that can be leveraged. All of these are, Zowe conformant. That's why they're here on this page. And it's you know, as I said earlier, I mean, the Conformance Program is all about giving, you know, folks that are looking to adopt Zowe, you know, confidence that these integrations really are, you know, secure and tested and viable. So earlier on, I touched on the mediation layer. So here, this is a nice quote from a colleague of mine, Greg McKinnon at Broadcom, who kind of summed up, or I think he summed up the benefits of the mediation layer really nicely. So APIs are the sort of foundational element that allow client applications access to mainframe resources. And you know, as someone that's looking to leverage APIs, of course, you can do that by leveraging each individually if you wanted to. But what we found is that, you know, the more APIs you actually, you know, start to consume, sort of the more it makes sense to actually have a management layer for those APIs. And so within a Zowe context, you know, that management layer is called the Zowe API mediation layer, and it allows you to consume these Zowe conformant REST APIs in a sort of more of a controlled, secure, and, you know, easier fashion. So we, you know, within Zowe, we recommend that folks stand up the mediation layer. You know, within Broadcom, we do the same. And, you know, I just want to spend a bit of time just to talk to you about the mediation layer and why we think it's important and why we recommend folks to actually, you know, stand it up. So at the top there, you can see kind of three different personas that I've picked out, three roles, if you like, within an organization that are involved in utilizing these REST APIs. So you can see at the top, you've got a DevOps person, application developer, and system administrator. So through different clients, they are all accessing services, REST API services that are running through the mediation layer here in this diagram. So the middle layer is the mediation layer itself, and then at the bottom you've got you know, the different REST services that are being accessed by the roles at the top. So you can see from the actual image, you know, the first point I want to highlight is that it gives you a single point of access, the mediation layer. So there's just one port that you need to go through. So I know, speaking to organizations, that's a significant plus. It can be very painful to have to open multiple ports. So here it's just, you know, one port and everything goes through that. API catalog, again, is, you know, the front end element, which gives you the inventory of all the APIs that you're accessing through the mediation layer, plus documentation. I'll show you a bit more on that later. Single sign-on. So this is a significant user experience benefit of the mediation layer. So essentially what it means is you only have to authenticate as one of the, you know, users at the top, authenticate once into the layer, and then you can access multiple services you know, on the southbound edge. So you don't have to re-authenticate each time you wanna you know, reach a different service. And then security. So security is fundamental to the mediation layer. I think you know, Jakub is going to talk tomorrow a bit more about some of the security elements. But essentially, you know, we offer various different opportunities to secure the services and access to the layer. So whether that's, you know, token-based authentication, certificates, etc. But, you know, we take security very, very seriously. And then at the bottom, you've got I've categorized it as sort of two different categories of APIs. So on the left-hand side, you've got the Zowe conformant APIs. So these are the vendor-produced APIs, whether that's Broadcom, IBM, Rocket, and hopefully others. So these are Zowe conformant APIs that you can install and reach through the mediation layer. And then on the right-hand side is what I'm calling internally developed infrastructure APIs. So these are APIs which an organization has actually built internally, again, to optimize, to automate, to improve their internal processes. And oftentimes, they might not have a management utility to manage all these APIs. So it depends a little bit on the organization. Those are sort of slightly more mature end that have many APIs running on production systems. They may well have some kind of management utility to manage those APIs, but others won't. And in some organizations it can be a case of there are all these internal technical infrastructure APIs, and they're not really known within the organization. They're not very well documented necessarily, or if they are, it's not standardized. And so, what the mediation layer does, in addition to, offering sort of management utility for the vendor-produced APIs, it also gives you an opportunity to actually onboard and manage your own homegrown infrastructure APIs, to document those in the API catalog, and so that those are visible to your entire organization, and folks can collaborate and build on top of these APIs. So this is a quick screenshot of the catalog. Again, as I was saying earlier, the sort of the front end component of the mediation layer. So once you've installed the mediation layer and you have the catalog running and you've onboarded a certain amount of services, this is the web application that's going to show you the different services that you have onboarded and have running on your mediation layer instance. So if you were to click on any one of these tiles, you would then be presented with a screen that looks a little bit like this. It's a little bit blurry. Apologies for that. But basically, that's when you go one layer down, and then you start to see documentation around the API itself. So there's a description that tells you a little bit about what it can be used for, and then there's Swagger documentation, code snippets. You can try out the API to see what kind of responses you would get. So it's a little bit sort of it's a way for API consumers that we talked about earlier to be able to sort of go into the catalog, learn about the APIs that are available, and even sort of explore and experiment a little bit with them, to see if it's the API they need, for their optimization or automation project. Yeah, and so just for completeness sake, APIs do have another important role within Zowe, and that's the fact that they actually power some of the sort of official Zowe clients out there. So as you're looking at the screen on the left-hand side, you see the CLI, and on the right-hand side is the Zowe Explorer. So both of these clients allow you to interact with the mainframe, data sets, jobs, etc., issuing TSO commands, etc. And all of this, both of these clients are powered by REST APIs that are accessing those mainframe resources. So I want to finish just by giving you a little sort of real-world example of how how these APIs can actually be used. So there's a number of different examples out there, use cases, and I'm learning more and more as I speak to more and more customers. But this is one particular one that I picked out. Thank you. So this, what you're looking at here, on the right-hand side, you're seeing ZOS. You're seeing the mainframe. So this is an example that is around the DB2 tools product solution at Broadcom, and how they've built out a REST API that can be used to gather, process, and visualize performance data around their DB2 instance. So again, you've got the mainframe box on the right-hand side. So you've got these data collectors, sysview for DB2 data collectors, and what they're doing is, they're fetching the data, and then it's being picked up by the actual REST API data service down here in the bottom corner. So this is the REST API that was built by the DB2 tools folks at Broadcom. So it takes that data that's being sent to it from the data collectors, and it then moves it off platform, hopefully via the API mediation layer, right? It's optional, but again, recommended by us that you have the mediation layer there. So the REST API is onboarded to the mediation layer, and that data is going across the mediation layer off platform on the open source side to Prometheus and Grafana, right? Which are then taking that data, processing it, and allowing folks to actually visualize that performance data in dashboards. So I know that the DB2 tools folks at Broadcom have a set of basic dashboards that they've showcased with this solution, but there's nothing to stop folks then creating their own dashboards and building on that further. But I think this is a nice example of how a REST API is being used to surface data off platform in an open source context, using modern tooling, Grafana, Prometheus, etc. And again, this is just one example, but there are a ton of examples of how REST APIs are being used now on the mainframe, as John said earlier this morning, to help organizations, integrate the mainframe with the rest of enterprise IT. Okay, so I'm just about out of time. That is, I think, that's everything that I had for you today. So please, I'm going to be here today and tomorrow. So if you're interested in talking about this a little bit further, I'd be more than happy to meet you and understand if you have any use cases, or just see what's try and answer any questions you might have. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference, and maybe talk to you at some point over the next 2 days. Thank you.